All right, so President-elect Trump, he won't take the oath of office till January 20th, but that is not stopping him from trying to clean up the economic mess that President Obama, of course, is leaving behind. Earlier today, the president-elect, he met with tech industry leaders to discuss job creation and innovation. And before today's roundtable discussion, well, the CEO of IBM, who attended the meeting, announced that her company is now going to create 25,000 new jobs right here in America, and they will invest over $1 billion over the next 4 years. Now, President-elect Trump also promised you, the American people, that he's going to focus on job growth, and that's what he's trying to do right now. Now, last week, Trump announced that Japan's SoftBank, they'll invest $50 billion into America's economy. That will create 50,000 new jobs. And remember, last month, Trump cut a deal with the manufacturer Carrier to save over 1,000 jobs that the company was planning to ship to Mexico. All of this, no doubt, a positive, a great start. But the truth is this: the president-elect has a lot of work cut out for him. Now, President Obama's policies, I've been telling you, a complete and utter disaster. Here's where Donald Trump is starting. The lowest labor participation rate since the 1970s, 95 million of your fellow Americans out of the labor force, the worst recovery since the 40s, the lowest home ownership rate in America in 51 years, 13 million more Americans on food stamps in the last 8 years, 43 million Americans living in poverty, 8 million more than 8 years ago. 1 in 5 American families, imagine this, without one person in the labor force. 1 in 6 American men, 18 to 34, they're either in jail, incarcerated, or living in mommy and daddy's basement because they don't have a job. And by the time he leaves office, well, the president will have accumulated more debt than 43 other presidents before him combined. Now, there are very clear reasons why President Obama failed. What did he do? He tried to use big government, statism, to create jobs, which has never worked. Now, remember his failed stimulus plan? He was going to create, quote, shovel-ready jobs. Then he joked they weren't so shovel-ready. Those jobs never materialized, and it cost you, the American taxpayers, nearly $1 trillion, over $800 billion. Now, here's why it failed, and we need to learn these lessons. All those billions of dollars, they were filtered through that big, bloated government bureaucracy in Washington. And remember, then it went to their friends and companies like Solyndra. It was destined to fail from day one. These results have been pathetic, and all we have to show for it is doubling the national debt and stealing from our kids. Now, Obama's plan didn't work. So the question we've got to ask tonight, before Donald Trump becomes president, what will work? How do we create success for what I call this election the forgotten man, the forgotten woman election? Now, President-elect Trump's plans, it's a stark contrast to President Obama's. He's going to take the opposite approach. He will implement policies that historically have worked. Now, here's the president-elect's economic plan. He wants to create jobs in America. How's he going to do it? Lower taxes, reform the tax code, 7 brackets to 3, a 15% corporate tax rate, a 10% repatriation rate for the trillions of dollars that multinational corporations have parked abroad in banks. He's going to cut, in a huge way, government regulation. He wants to renegotiate trade deals. Energy independence, so important for national security and job creation. Repealing and replacing Obamacare, that should end up like a tax cut for most Americans. And he has a goal of 4% GDP growth. Obama did not have 1 year of 3% GDP growth, the only president in history never to have 1 year of 3% GDP. Now, if President-elect Trump, if he follows through on that agenda, it could create one of the biggest economic boons, I argue, the country has ever seen, and history, I think, proves. Now, it would be very similar to what Presidents John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan did. They understood that in order to have real economic growth, you need to unleash the potential of the free market capitalism. Go back to JFK. He set in motion a plan to cut the top marginal tax rate from 91%. He dropped it to 77%. Now, during his short time as president, 3.8 million jobs were created, while seeing an average of 4.4% GDP growth. Ronald Reagan, he took over for Jimmy Carter. Remember, it was a bad economy then. He took the concept further. He shredded the top marginal rate, lowering it over the course of his presidency from 70% to 28%. As a result, Reagan in 8 years created 20 million new jobs after the 82 recession ended. GDP growth averaged 3.5%. Government revenues nearly doubled. They spiked by 65%. We saw at the end of his presidency the longest period of peacetime economic growth. These lessons are so important. President-elect Trump has one major advantage over JFK and Ronald Reagan. We know that we can become energy independent. We have massive natural gas, shale oil reserves, and not only will tapping into those resources create millions of jobs here at home, but it will also create a whole new foreign policy dynamic in the Middle East. We won't be dependent on countries that hate our guts. And if we export some of those resources to Western Europe, well, they won't be dependent on Putin and Russia for their energy needs. Now, the only part of the president-elect's agenda that I worry about is the infrastructure plan. Now, he's talking about $1 trillion in spending. Everybody agrees we've got to fix our crumbling roads and bridges. That's obvious. But how are we going to pay for it? How can we plan? Do we pay as we go? And the money, by the way, cannot be spent. Somehow we got to get it out of the hands of congressmen and senators, 535 greedy bureaucrats in Washington that will misappropriate that money. Now, finally, there has to be an outside commission, some entity, someplace, somewhere that oversees how this $1 trillion is spent. There needs to be accountability.